Welcome to L'Dor Va-Dor's Touch of Torah with Rabbi Barry Silver tonight. It is August 23rd, and we're pleased to talk about the parasha of the upcoming Shabbat, and I turn it over to Rabbi Barry.
Hey, thanks a lot, Sharon. This week we're talking about the Torah passage known as RE'EH. RE'EH means behold, comes from the word to see, and it's a particle in a word that's very common in modern day Hebrew. In Hebrew, to say hello, goodbye, or peace, you say shalom. But specifically, when you say goodbye, you can say lehitraot. And lehitraot literally means until we see again. Very similar to in French, you can say adieu for goodbye, which means to God, literally. But you could also say au revoir, which means until we see each other again. Voir is to see. Then in Spanish, they have adios, which means to God. And then they also have hasta la vista, which means, again, until the sight, until we see each other again. So re'eh means to see, and it's a particle in lehit ra'ot, until we see again. What this passage is saying is it starts out, behold, and then Moses is giving a review of the laws and the statutes, and sometimes with some embellishments. Being the good teacher that he is, he recognizes that repetition is a good way to inculcate some doctrine into the students. And also, this is a new generation. So he's speaking to the Jews right before they enter the promised land, which is 40 years after they started. The generation that came out of Egypt was deemed unfit to enter the promised land because they were scared and nervous and had a slave mentality. So Moses decided to review the history and also some of the laws and regulations. These laws, by our standards, are a little bit harsh. Some would say draconian. By modern Jewish standards, they're abhorrent. We would repudiate them, unless, of course, you're Orthodox. Then you consider this to be God's word, and you find a way to rationalize the irrational and to justify the unjustifiable. In case you think I'm being just a little bit extreme, I'll share some of the views in RE'EH, and then you can decide for yourself if you think I've properly assessed the situation. So RE'EH starts out with a rather interesting set of regulations dealing with the consumption of meat. There was some conflict in the ancient law about eating meat. There was one school of thought that said that eating meat, taking the life of an animal, is a sacred act, and therefore it could only be done in a holy place. It couldn't just be done willy-nilly. It could only be done by the priests. They would say special prayers. The animal would be sacrificed, and it was done for a religious purpose. It could be sacrificed in order to try to atone for a sin. It could be sacrificed in order to express one's rejoicing and thanksgiving to God for some blessing that the person had received, such as if they were ill and then they recovered. Could be sacrificed at certain holidays, certain times of the year, where sacrifices were made to give thanks for the harvest. But in all of those instances, the sacrifice would be done by a priest in a religious ritual with prayers, and then the food from the sacrificed animal, part of it would go to the priest, and part would be shared by the community. So someone would give some of their largesse, which in agricultural times was an animal, sacrifice the animal in a holy place by a priest, and they would share that with the people. That was one school of thought, and that prevailed in Judaism for centuries, we believe, and the animal had to be sacrificed in a special place. Anthropologists, historians believe that later on, when the Jews became more dispersed, it was impractical to go to this holy place. to do that. And there was dispensations made which said that you can sacrifice the animal on your own. It doesn't have to be part of a religious ritual. It doesn't have to be done by a priest. However, in order to retain some of the concept that all life is sacred, including animal life, and it should not be taken frivolously, they said you can do it on your own, but there's got to be certain rituals, regulations accompanying that, set the consumption of meat. And Re'eh, this passage is talking about what those regulations are. And it says you can't consume the blood. The blood represents the life force of the animal, so you can't consume the blood. There's certain other parts of the animal that couldn't be consumed. Later on, they said you can't mix milk and meat. The actual Torah passage says that you can't boil a calf in its mother's milk, which was considered barbaric. Over centuries, for reasons that the Jewish people long ago forgot, they extended that to say you can't mix milk and meat, which makes no rational sense, but still bears a vestige of the original rule. And then they also made regulations regarding the methodology of the slaughter, which had to be done in a way that was as quick and painless as possible. And so they made regulations that had to be done a certain way that they thought would expedite death and reduce the amount of suffering. Today, sadly, the Orthodox cling to some of these regulations, but do it in a mindless way, so that the actual rules that have become overlaid upon Orthodoxy now make the sacrifice and the slaughter even more barbaric and more painful than would otherwise be the case. So it actually goes directly against the entire purpose of the rule, which the Orthodox tend not to pay attention to the purpose. They just follow the literal rule, not as it is in the Torah, but as it's been handed down to them over generations and generations of people who have further embellished it. The Torah also has in it, in this passage, something that I referred to in the beginning, that is so hideous and so barbaric that modern Jews repudiate it, but traditional Jews have trouble rejecting it. And that is the rules and regulations, the laws regarding someone who preaches a new doctrine unknown to the forefathers and to our ancestors. And what it says is that the Torah shouldn't be added to, or it shouldn't be subtracted. And there should be no new gods in the Torah. You should only worship the one true God. And so it says that if somebody comes and preaches a new doctrine unknown to the ancestors, that doctrine should be squelched and the person offering it should be stoned to death. But not just should the person be stoned to death, but if it's your brother or your son or your family member or even your spouse, and they're espousing this new doctrine, you should be the first one to cast the stone, and then the rest of the community will follow suit. So that is a very horrible passage that breeds intolerance for innovations in the law, which fortunately most Jews have rejected. There's another part of that follows in sequence. Not only do you stone to death someone who brings a new doctrine, but if there's a community or a town in which there are people who are preaching this new doctrine, and the town allows this to happen, then you must inquire whether this is the case and investigate. And if it turns out that there are people in this town preaching the new doctrine, then according to Deuteronomy, you should take the sword to that town and kill every man, woman, and child in the town. And you shouldn't leave out the cattle. They must be slaughtered also for allowing this new doctrine to be promulgated. Nobody's sure exactly what that means, but it does mean that if you're preaching a doctrine, like for instance, the people who perpetrated the New Testament and talked about Jesus, they would have been executed instantly. So the Christians who say that what they're doing is the logical conclusion of the Torah and that they are the fulfillment of the Torah, well, not quite. What they're doing according to the Torah is heresy, and it should be greeted with the death penalty. If you introduce new ways of worshiping, that also could subject you to the death penalty. So needless to say, someone like me wouldn't have lasted too long in those days. I would have been executed along with the disrespectful children, women who got married and were not virgins at the time, people who picked up sticks on the Sabbath, and people who committed other types of violations. The passage teaches us to be rather intolerant towards novel ideas and newness. Of course, the rabbis try to extract something redeeming from the passages, and I do also. And so I always look at these passages and think, if I don't take it literally, what can I learn from this in order to find some principle or some precept that I can find of benefit? And usually I'm able to do that. In this case, I have trouble doing it. Even with my creative, imaginative mind, I have trouble finding something redeeming about these passages in Deuteronomy and simply chalk it up to something that fortunately we've outgrown, we've rejected, and we should certainly repudiate and not try to rationalize. You could say that Judaism believes that we should adhere to ancient principles and doctrines and shouldn't just cast them aside. I suppose I can go along with the adherence to certain traditions, but the death penalty and stoning for introducing novelty into the religion doesn't accord with my view of what Judaism is really all about or should be about. That's pretty much my take on RE'EH, and I'd be very interested to hear what anyone else thinks about the passage. If you agree, feel free to speak up. And if you disagree, you're also welcome to add your point of view. So now I'll turn it over to others.
You said there was no redeeming factor in this, and I think there is, just by its name, RE'EH, or RE'EH, to behold. And sometimes we see people and we see what they look like from the outside, and we immediately make an impression and decide what that person is like if we don't know them. You know, maybe by their dress, maybe by their actions, maybe by their hand movements, whatever, maybe by their words. We don't get to know them. And I think by the name of this parasha, RE'EH, behold, to see, it's saying don't just see the person for what they look like on the outside, but look inside and see how they are as a person. See them inside and out, and then make your judgments rather than just looking at the outside and making. And I think that to me is a valid lesson from because I do look a little bit into the parashas before, and I thought that was a redeeming factor of this parasha. Maybe, you know.
Well, Sharon, I do give you credit for being able to extract something positive. I know the rabbis have focused in on that. Unfortunately, there's not even a scintilla of evidence or of discussion in this passage about what you're talking about. I mean, what you're saying is a very good principle and concept. We shouldn't judge people or doctrines superficially, but give them the benefit of the doubt. But this passage says not a word about that. There are rabbis who want to try to find something, so they make things up that don't exist in the passage, and then after they make it up, say, well, this is a good principle, so let's use this as a guiding principle of RE'EH, but it's not in there. In fact, RE'EH is actually saying the opposite. It's saying that if somebody says a doctrine that's new, don't look on the inside. Don't try to find out what they're all about. Don't ask them any questions, well, why do you think that, or find out. It simply says, take up the stone and stone them to death. Similar to a city, it doesn't say to investigate the doctrine and see if it's it's valid. It just simply says, if it's a new doctrine, unknown to your ancestors, reject it, repudiate it, and kill the person that brought it. So it's actually saying the opposite. But I would say that what you're saying about not being superficial and not judging things by its cover is a very good doctrine. And I think it's actually the antithesis of this, but it teaches us something important. If you hear a new doctrine, if you hear a Judaism expressed in a different way, don't react like they do here and stone the person or reject it. Listen, Shema, Re'eh, behold it, listen to it, and see if there's some worth before you just reject it because it's new. And it may be that you'll find that parts of it or all of it are accurate and resonate with you. I know that many Jews reject anything that's different. And a lot of times if you open up your mind, you'll say, you know what? I don't agree with all of it. It's kind of like someone was saying in the beginning, said, you know, my brother isn't really on your side philosophically as far as his conclusion goes, but he didn't form a snap judgment. He didn't just reject what you're saying. He read, he listened, he investigated your argument. And he might not agree with all of it, but he agrees with some, and he understands, and he is able to communicate. And I respect that greatly. I respect people who disagree with me agreeably and who take the time to investigate. I have a friend who's a fundamentalist Christian, and he's very outspoken and disagrees with me up and down the line. And I sent him an email. I said, you know, it'd be a great discussion if we were to speak publicly and have a debate. Do you have the courage to engage me in debate? And he wrote back and he said, I prefer to speak to you privately so that I could try to help you to learn about God, because I fear for your soul. And I'm worried that you're going to be condemned. I'd like to teach you a little bit about God. So I said, well, I'd be glad to meet with you privately and explain why you feel so scared like a little boy who's afraid of dying and needs to have a father in the sky who's going to protect them after their death and console them like a security blanket. I'd be glad to speak to you privately about that and see if I can help you overcome your fears. However, I still wish to speak publicly so that people can hear both sides. And of course, naturally, he rejected the public discourse. Sadly, many people who call themselves religious behave like they do in Re'eh. They just repudiate, reject, don't open up their minds. But I think it would be a better world if they did. Anybody else care to share anything about the passage? Yes, Valerie.
Well, I was going to say you could take it to the next level also. I mean, I think, and we've discussed this in the past, Martin Luther King in many of his presentations and his speeches took excerpts and ideas and concepts from the Torah. And I think in some way what he did when he gave the speech, you know, judge people by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. It's the same thing. Judge someone not by the initial discussion, but the intention of their discussion. Right. You know, so you could actually carry it into modern society as we are today.
Oh,
I mean, we are judging people by their color and by their accents and by where they come from, and not by their ideas and their concepts and their reasonings. Sometimes for their why they're doing what they're doing.
Thank you. Yes, or by their religion or by their political party. We just assume if they're a particular party or religion or race, we draw all types of conclusions and we don't get to know them. So thank you, Valerie, for sharing that. It's a very good point you raised, and something that you're right is very important today. It's interesting also that, as you say about Martin Luther King in the Bible, he first met Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, a great rabbi who became a good friend of his, at a conference on race. And when they met at this conference, they each quoted Amos, who said, let righteousness well up like waters and justice like a mighty stream. And they realized how much they shared in common. And they agreed that the conference on race started when Moses first confronted Pharaoh and has continued ever since. And Martin Luther King did derive inspiration from the Torah. He saw himself as a modern day Moses leading his people to the promised land. And that's why the last speech he gave, he said, I've been to the mountaintop, reminiscent of Moses visiting the top of the mountain. And God said, look upon the promised land. You'll be able to gaze upon it, but you'll never enter. And he said, I have gazed upon the promised land. I can see a time when we're living in peace and where people are judged, as Valerie says, by the content of their character. I can see it. I might not get there with you, but I feel good. I'm at ease. I'm at peace because I've seen the promised land. And the Bible gave him a sense that he would be successful. Some people in his place would have given up and say, it's hopeless. I'm not going to try. But the Bible not only inspired him with the story of Moses, but also that the conclusion, it gave him hope for the future. And the Bible has been used by freedom fighters everywhere to believe the words that was articulated by Joshua and by by Moses eventually. And he said that we shall overcome. Yachol nuchala. They said we shall overcome. And that became this biblical passage, the theme and the mantra for the civil rights movement. Anybody else? Dr. Brooks.
Yes, sir. Have you ever been to the Civil Rights Museum here in Memphis? I say,
No.
I got better go
No,
here. My dog's barking. If you ever get the opportunity to go, I've been 3 or 4 times. Sometimes over some of the holidays when I've taken some time off and then, gone to synagogue and so forth. But there's a square in the exact spot where Dr. Martin Luther King was shot. And I have a picture of just my toes of my shoe projecting over that spot because I do not feel worthy to stand in the spot where the man was killed. But it's an absolutely wonderful, wonderful place. It's in the Lorraine Motel where he was shot. I was just going to say earlier too that sometimes the Bible misbehaves. That's one of my favorite quotes, and so maybe that may be part of what you're talking about. But also what the young lady said. We judge ourselves on our intentions, but we judge others on their actions. And so, I think a lot of times, but yeah, really, really interesting. My only question is this the verse that talks about if somebody, that we're not allowed to have other gods? Because that, of course, is one of our 2 main arguments as to why we don't accept Christianity. We can't accept Jesus as God. And so forth. So I think that may be the redeeming quality in that it gives us some distinction in our argument. But yes. I too have a ultra Calvinist friend who I'm sure I'm a reprobate mind and he's cast me off by now. He loves me, but he kind of the same way that I'm sure your friend is.
Well, I'm sure he's praying for your soul also.
He is exactly. He wants to, he'll be able to, he's happy to answer any of my questions, which is always interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but not the other way around. Well, you can share with him, yes, that comes from this passage. If someone brings to you a new God not known to your fathers, such as Jesus, execute them. That's exactly right. There's other arguments that you can make as to why Jews rejected Jesus as God, not necessarily as a prophet and not necessarily as a teacher or role model, but as God. That's one right here in Deuteronomy. You shouldn't accept new gods who weren't known to your ancestors. The other is it says God will never take human form. The other is it says that God is one, not 3. It says that's a basic principle of the Jewish faith. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. The Lord is one, and therefore the Trinity is a direct defiance of biblical law. Another reason, which is a little less direct, is that Judaism says in Genesis and other places that we're born with a pure spirit, that the soul that you have given us is pure. Christianity classically taught says that the soul is evil, that because of the sin of Adam and Eve, that sin is passed down through the generations, through all of humanity, and it's specifically passed down, according to Orthodox Christianity, through the sexual act, which is considered to them sinful, and through the woman's body, which is also tainted. The fact that we emerge through the woman's body means that we're literally conceived and brought forth in sin. And therefore, human beings are born evil. And the only way to overcome it is with Jesus. Jews repudiate that and say, no, we're born pure and good. That's why in Yom Kippur, we say the soul you have given us is pure. We don't believe that we have to go to extraordinary lengths or accept a mediator or the death of somebody else. We believe we're just returning to our basic nature, the purity of our nature. And we can do that rather simply. It doesn't have to be some kind of a mysterious type of process. By accepting that we were born pure and we've gone astray. We started behaving in ways that are harmful. We started accepting doctrines that are not helpful. And to atone, repudiate those ideas and practices in ourselves. Try to make amends for what we've done wrong. And make a serious commitment to start anew. And if we can do that, then we achieve purity and oneness. Anybody else?
Well, I have a really, really hard time, with the concept of Christianity in general. I mean, the whole concept of Yahshua or Jesus was the fact that he was preaching the word of Abraham. So how this whole issue got convoluted and so many people worship this person as God. I mean, they bowed down to him. They prayed to, they literally looked to Yahshua or Jesus as God to get the Holy Trinity. That's gone by the wayside, so I honestly don't understand that. I mean, here you have somebody that was tortured by the Romans because he was preaching the word of Abraham. So that whole concept to me, I don't know how it got so convoluted. I really don't. It's a mystery to me.
Well, it's no mystery to the historians. The concept of a God having a child with a virgin woman is as old as ancient Egyptian, Greek, Roman.
Well, Hercules, I mean, they all were part gods. They were demigods.
So we know where it came from. It's just a Jewish version of the ancient God human myth of being crucified, rising on Easter Sunday, having 12 disciples, having a virgin mother. The story is as old as ancient mythology, and that's where it came from. Christians don't want to acknowledge that because it would make it patently obvious where their religion came from. So the priests don't like to talk about it, but that's where it came from. It was created by Jews living in Greek-speaking Roman Empire who picked up a lot of these ideas from paganism and formed a hybrid. Much as American Jews speak English and learn about American democracy, and formed a hybrid of ancient Judaism and new Jewish democratic thinking. We call it Reform or Reconstructionist. But what we do here is a hybrid also. But fortunately, it's a hybrid that takes some really great concepts of freedom, liberation, equality, and many of them are very consistent with Jewish thought and practice, or the natural extension of it. So it's also ironic that Jesus said, I came not to change a jot or a tittle of the old law. And then in his name, they've changed the old law beyond any recognition. Anybody else want to share some thoughts? Go ahead, Sharon.
No, I'm good.
Okay, well, let me just make a few announcements, and Sharon can also share some as well. We promote a rational type of Judaism. Some people think that means it's cold, sterile, very kind of like a Judaism for eggheads, but it's actually the opposite of that. We practice at L'Dor Va-Dor a type of Judaism that is filled with awe, wonder, mystery, joy, spirituality, but in a rational sense. We don't believe that in order to appreciate the numinous and the wondrous, and the magical in the universe that we need to be cut off from reality. We believe that the more we understand about reality, the more we realize how miraculous life is. And so we join those two in something that you could call inspirational Judaism, inspiring and rational. You could call it cosmic Judaism in that it was predicted by Einstein, a religion that's not just tribal, but extends to unify us with everything, everyone, all life, and with the cosmos. So that's what we do. All are welcome, and all are welcome to challenge and to debate. And we'll be having high holiday services in a beautiful, wonderful place. It's Santa Lucia's High School, and it's a really nice auditorium, very comfortable. And we have beautiful music, inspiring messages. It's open to all. If you're Jewish, you're welcome. If you're not Jewish, you're welcome. If you have a service animal, you can bring them to the service. We agree that everybody is welcome at the service. If you want to make a donation, you're welcome to do so. We have tickets that go for the suggested price of a little bit shy of $100, but if you're not doing well and that's a burden for you, give us whatever you're comfortable giving. But we're really interested mostly in seeing you and spreading the word about rational faith. We believe rational faith can save humanity from itself, and irrational faith will take us over the abyss. And if you'd like to share that with us, any religion or any background, you're welcome to do so. It'll be Rosh Hashanah Eve, Rosh Hashanah Day, Yom Kippur Eve, and Yom Kippur Day. We'll have an interfaith dialogue, and we're trying to line up a really interesting guest speaker on the day of Yom Kippur. And if you have any suggestions for how to make things better, we're open to suggestion. We don't stone people because they have new ideas. We welcome new ideas and innovation. I thank everybody for joining us. I'm not sure how much longer these Tuesday evenings will go because I'll be gearing up for the high holidays, and we may suspend them until after the high holidays. But we'll keep you posted on that. We meet at the Mariposa this Friday on Hypoluxo and Lyons. And then after this Friday, in the month of September, we will be meeting at the Carlisle, which is a upscale senior citizens place. They've graciously extended and opened their doors to us. We will meet there Friday night at 7:30, and we'll meet at Mariposa at Hypoluxo and Lyons this Friday at 7:30. All are welcome. We'd love to see you there. If you're far away and can't get there, tune us in on the internet because you're welcome to join us there as well. I see Peter just joined us. Peter, it's a pleasure to see you too. It's a pleasure to see everybody. And Peter, if you have, I'll let you close us out if you have a final comment.
Hold on, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I need to correct something. Rabbi, it's 7 o'clock at the Carlisle. The services are 7:30 at Mariposa, 7 o'clock at the
Thank you.
Carlisle.
7 o'clock at the Carlisle. Thank you.